Hello everyone and welcome to this video, which is in our Great Engine Opening series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler and we are continuing our look at Torch version 2, the new version of Torch. Torch's openings, this time with 1d4 and other stuff. So 1d4 isn't Torch's main opening at all, but still finds a lot of very interesting stuff. So let's have a look. So after d4, Torch's main idea is knight f6, and now actually it tends to play into knight f3 as white, and then go on to 3c4. I've somehow with with the way that Chessbase does stuff, it's put everything under 2c4, but just bear in mind that 2 knight f3 is normally how Torch is doing stuff. So e6, knight f3 now, transposing back. d5, knight c3 and bishop b4, and this is Torch's main line when starting with 1d4. It's just like Alpha Zero in actual fact. I've said that a few times now. Yeah, I mean other engines, for example, like c5 the most, the very solid semi-Tarash, but bishop b4 is the Ragozin, and Torch's main line is bishop g5, h6, queen a4 check, takes, and e3, castles, bishop e2. It's a small edge for white, not a huge amount, but yeah, the whole Ragozin's pretty tough for white to get an edge against. So castles, bishop d7, bishop c4, these are quite well-known lines. This is all played before, lots of theory, Torch still following that. But after queen e6, yeah, queen a4 is Torch's novelty. c4 was previously played in Xu against Zeng, in Tianjin Binhai Cup in 2023. It's just a slight advantage for white. Actually, it's not so. It's not so bad actually. It's one of those sort of typical positions where if you get it right with one colour, you can really make some damage, I think. But in principle, it's just a small edge. But yeah, Ragozin is a pretty good opening for black. But that's quite interesting. I mean, some other engines like e3 as the main move here instead of bishop g5, but Torch going for bishop g5 there. Looking at other sensible stuff, bishop e7, bishop f4, that's what the engines always want, and I mean you end up getting into these very solid lines indeed. Yeah, the theory goes on, and Torch has got a small novelty on move 20. Yeah, you know, nothing amazing, but again, it's the Queen's Gambit declined. There's you know, you can only do so much really. By the way, yeah, I mentioned it in the previous video. All of the lines I'm looking at and loads more is in a PGN, just in the normal place. So it's yeah, you know, don't worry about writing it down or whatever, and also don't worry if your own favourite line isn't covered. It's pretty much bound to be in here. I think I've done an awful lot of stuff. One interesting thing is C6, the Semi-Slav. I'm doing that specially for good old Mr. Beads. Actually, what Torch wants to do is, through a slightly funny move order, bishop e2 first, and then queen c2, it wants to play the queen c2 system against the Semi-Slav. And, well, its main continuation here is the good old IQP approach from black. Pretty solid, you've got to say. Yeah, I mean white's got a small edge here, but black's doing, you know, completely fine. It's just an IQP position. Here rook a d1 is a novelty over the rook a c1 that was played in the correspondence game, and it's just a little bit better. I mean, it's one of those positions where, you know, the engines sort of say, yeah, it's fine, but yeah, I mean, really it does depend a little bit who understands this better, really, because you know, it's very easy for white to go wrong in an IQ piece, just suddenly allow some tactics. It's also easy for black to run out of steam and then just end up losing the d pawn. So yeah, I mean, this is quite a decent way of playing for white, I think. But it's not the most exciting way against the Semi-Slav, so I made Torch have a little look at some other more exciting lines. This is the Botvinnik system. Always very interested in that, of course. Very funny in actual fact, because what the engines want, I mean, I think it's all of the engines now. I mean, years of analytical work have been dedicated to knight bd7, but actually Smyslov's bishop e7 is what the engines really want. In my day this was really meant to be an inferior line, but for the engines it's just an absolute dead draw. And the knight comes round to a6. This is quite nice. Castles, and then h4 c5, and the theory goes on and on and on, as it always does in the Botvinnik. Rook a d1, knight g5, queen c6, all theory, all well known, takes this ending as well. And then rook g8 is Torch's novelty. There's a game, Tomaszewski against Didani in the FIDE World Cup, that went rook h7, and that ended in a draw. Rook g8 is Torch's idea. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's slightly more accurate, but not crucial, I think. This is the idea. The king gets very active, the knight gets active. Black's a pawn down, but plenty of activity. Again, the more positions I see really in that in engine preparation, you see the evaluation, but you think, how confident would I be of bringing this to a good conclusion? I'm tending to get less and less sure, I have to say, as time goes by, and I'm not sure whether that's due to the fact that I'm getting worse, or simply maybe due to the fact as well that the engine recommendations and the equal evaluations is getting it's happening in even more complicated positions. Really, I mean, this is still a very complicated endgame. It could still go horribly wrong for black or for white if I was playing it in blitz. So. But that's quite interesting. Just this bishop e7 line is really what the engines think is the best one. I've seen it with other engines before. h6 is the Moscow variation, and bishop f6 is actually what Torch wants to play. But I made Torch have a look at the anti-Moscow Gambit, which is just a very interesting gambit. Alpha Zero scored quite nicely against Stockfish in these Stockfish 8 in these lines, but I think in general nowadays it's not really thought to be that amazing for white, although I mean, difficulties do exist. Actually, what Torch is looking for here is this move knight a6, queen b6, not putting the knight on d7, putting the knight on a6. This standard idea of white, you just make this into a full pawn sacrifice, and but break up the queen side. But bishop d6 was played in the game Koshmak against Hervet, email game. But castles was Torch's idea, with the idea that this is just a draw by repetition. The queen's got to stay on the c-file, and you just keep on chasing it, basically. So that's the anti-Moscow Gambit. There's also there was also another line with just a little bit less analysis. Their Torch after b5 wasn't playing bishop e2, was playing knight e5. But this is just a well-known theoretical line. Very important, actually, this knight bd7. But just a well-known line. I think this was even given in a very good book by Lars Schandorf for quality chess on the Semi-Slav. He even gave virtually all this line, I think. White gets some stuff and seems to be having some attack, but actually, this is all perfectly fine. Queen a3, queen d6, and it's a draw. Just somehow black's structure seems to remain solid enough to keep the king safe, or safe enough. Anyway, it can, it's a little bit drafty, so you get checks, but you don't get decisive checks. And somehow, along the way, in the Semi-Slav, black always seems to pick up quite a few extra attributes. It's a bit inherent to the opening. The strong queen side that means that white can't exchange off queens, for example. It's anti-Moscow Gambit, according to Torch, not looking that dangerous in actual fact. So Torch actually prefers taking on f6 and playing e3. Actually, this very quiet line. I mean, when I didn't play the 5 bishop t5 very often, but when I played this line against the Moscow, then this was always the line that I wanted to play. just here, and a quick e4 to e5, and yeah, and try and play on the dark squares, even though you are missing your dark square bishop a little bit, and also try and soften up the king side as well. And yeah, just interesting to see Torch wanting to do that too. So Torch was actually going for this sort of line, knight d6, b5, queen e3, and now, yeah, b takes c4. This was Ambatsumova against Sonka, Title Tuesday 2021. And now instead of knight b7 that was played there, just takes bishop b7, which, you know, is pretty sensible. You're going to lose a pawn, but you'll have the two bishops for compensation. But that was the Semi-Slav. So basically, oh good lord, that was basically nothing very much there, really. Although, yeah, you know, incredibly complicated lines, of course. Let's have a look. There's a lot more in there, but let's have a look at some slightly different lines. Yeah, I mean, knight c3 instead of knight f3, bishop b4. I was wondering whether Torch would play e3, and indeed Torch does play e3. All the engines seem to feel that, well, they feel that the Nimzo-Indian is nothing much for white, so e3 is the best of the bunch, which makes me happy, because that's the line I played as a professional all the time. There's some interesting stuff from Torch, actually. It's playing bishop d3 against c5. It's playing this IQP position with the knight on e2. I lost a bad game with this many years ago as white, so I've always had a bit of a ropey feeling about it, but yeah, the engines do seem to feel that this is quite decent. I mean, this looks very nice for black to me, but it's not really it's not Torch's fault, it's just the opening, really. Torch knight e4 is a novelty. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's fine for white, but it's nothing super special, it must be said. Against d5, which is another move order, Torch likes going a3, which is interesting. Was supposed to be an inferior move order when I was professional, but somehow, yeah, you know, this is. I think, you know, white's just looking for anything to have a bit of life in it. I mean, in principle, you know, white's got a fairly nice centre, possibility to move it to c4, two bishops. It shouldn't be too bad. The only problem is that, yeah, you're spending quite a bit of time trying to get hold of those two bishops, and it's just hard to really, yeah, to really, you know, if black plays actively, it can be sort of hard to really get loose there. a4 was a Torch novelty here. Rook e1, but yeah, you're seeing, you know, white struggling to really put something, to really you know, activate the bishops and put stuff on light squares, really, because black's got so much light square control here. But it's a complicated game, and definitely in human play, you know, this sort of thing can go wrong. So actually quite interesting to see this move a3. As I said, you know, always said to be a mistake for white, and but yeah, this is what Torch is advocating, and actually looks quite interesting. Actually, after c4, g6, what would Torch want to do? I was just curious somehow, and interestingly enough, Torch wants to play h4. So the good old Harry attack. There's a book by Simon Williams, Richard Palliser recently on this line. Yeah, indeed, it is pretty interesting. Bishop g7, knight c3, c5 d5, d6 e4, e6 bishop e2, takes. Yeah, with the modern Benoni in this sort of move order, you know, white can take back with the e pawn on d5, not give black any counterplay against the pawn on e4, and keep the black queen side under wraps. Was always supposed to be quite nice for white, this sort of thing, but somehow the engines are never really that worried about it. And yeah, I mean, I was always worried a bit as white that, you know, you're sort of flattening out the pawn structure. You know, the modern Benoni, it's a bit scary, but there is imbalance, so you always feel there's plenty that can happen. Here, this is a bit flat. Well, you know, the engines always seem to exchange off a lot of pieces here, and yeah, you know, seem to do all right with it. This is a slight edge for white. You know, you've got a bit more space. In principle, you've got a few more possibilities on both sides, but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't expect this to lead to a win, you know, against a player of equal strength, really. You know, so that's Torch's main line. But interesting that 3h4 is what Torch wants. Let's have a look. Oh, I looked at loads of King's Indian lines, but they're not maybe completely relevant. Just for Mr. Dodgy, I had a look at the Budapest, and that's quite interesting actually. All my engines actually want to play the move e4. I'll probably do a video on this sometime. I've got loads of analysis on it. This old Alekin variation. Torch plays another move that was actually very popular with Leela and Stockfish in previous incarnations, but they've moved away from it. I didn't know this at all until I read a book called Gambit Killer by Ivan Salgado Lopez, a really nice book actually. And he was demonstrating this approach. Always f4. You definitely want to kick that knight away from e5. It's in a good spot, so don't leave it there. But you play and you leave the pawn on e3, so that well, black's going to put a bishop on c5 most likely. So you're trying to keep some control of the dark squares, and you go knight c3. Well, here black plays g6. You deal with the bishop on g7, you just neutralize that, and then you just play your knights out, basically bishop e2. And white's got a very nice position here. It's like some sort of English opening actually, where you've got this pawn against this pawn, and that gives you a lovely outpost on d5 for your knight. I mean, white's just pleasantly better here. This is not much fun really for playing the Budapest, I do have to say. So sorry, Mr. Dodgy. So yeah, there's quite a few good lines against the Budapest. I think it's only really the old main lines, e5 takes, knight g4, knight f3, bishop c5, e3, knight c6, that can offer white, black some a bit of fun really. Everything else is really a little bit depressing, I have to say. Let's have a look. Was there anything else? Oh well, yeah, I was just intrigued because a Torch is normally playing 2 knight f3 and then afterwards playing 3 c4. I was just wondering, well then what are you going to do against the Grunfeld, for example? I mean, Torch was actually looking at queen b3 a little bit. But in the end it played c takes d5, e4, and then bishop e3, which again is alpha 0. And also my line! I spent, at some stage I spent massive amount of time analysing this line, and managed to use it a couple of times, but nothing in relation to the amount of work I did on it. Did some beautiful analysis, I have to say, though I haven't dared, this was in the pre-computer age, I haven't dared check it with engine since. I mean, basically going for this ending, this was what Alpha 0 was always going for against Stockfish 8, and worked out quite nicely. I mean, the idea is to try and move this pawn to h6. I mean, if you haven't seen Game Changer, then well, I mean, there's it's definitely worth reading it for these Grunfeld games. They were absolutely stunning. h6 is a good idea here, just to stop white from gaining too much space on the king's side. I mean, I find this quite pleasant for white, this sort of position. I think you've really got to be a Grunfeld player to enjoy it. Takes, and then king d3 was a novelty. I think king c2 draw agreed was the human predecessor. King d3 played, and it's a little bit of an edge for white. I mean, you can try and get your pieces in. This knight, Torch was doing a nice little maneuver of trying to get the knight round to b4, or there's definitely possibilities here for white for a nice little grind. That king side's a little bit weak as well. In all fairness, I think if you were playing this line all the time with black, I can't imagine that it's that much fun. There's one thing I was curious about. I'll just show you. It's the Rook b1 variation. I mean, this is again something that's cost months, years of human effort to analyse. I spent a long time analysing this as well. There's a very long debate in human circles about whether bishop g5, h6 first was better, or just bishop e3. Unfortunately, one of the main games that I played in this line was when I played white against Bogdan Lalic, and he just queened his a pawn, which was rather embarrassing. But anyway, this is the main line nowadays. a5, a4, takes, bishop h3, e5, a3, d6. When you think human players analyse this an awful lot without an engine at some stage, obviously didn't get to this sort of depth. Takes, d7. Yep, queening there. It queens. Bishop d5 check. The queen's got to take, and bishop e7, and well, this is the ending. 4 versus 3, in principle, a draw. Queen b7 is Torch's novelty. Queen c6 was played in a previous correspondence game, but yeah, crazy line. But I imagine this is basically more or less the last word on it. So that's Torch's line against the Grunfeld when it plays its 2 knight f3 move order. Let's have a look. d4 d5 is quite nice. c4. Why don't I have a look at d takes c4? Queen's Gambit accepted. Yeah, played in the candidates. Of course, Gukesh drew against Hikaru in this line in the last round, and Hikaru found it very hard to make anything. It's a very unusual line that Gukesh played. Knight f6, e6, bishop c4, bishop e7. Yeah, I mean, you would. It's really one of those moves where you say total amateur. You know, what do you know? Playing a move like this, you've got to strike back on the centre. But I mean, the idea really is that, you know, it's a little bit like what Nepomniachtchi was doing in the, and also Goryachkina did it as well in the candidates as well. In a Queen's Gambit declined, you know, you just sort of you're just at some stage somewhere you're going to play c5. The queens get swapped off. And you don't really mind playing some sort of symmetrical position, even if you're a couple of tempi down, you know, and that's basically the idea here. What Torch wanted in any case was not to play the IQP like Hikaru did, but just to play like this, which to be honest looks very sensible. You know, I mean, you take the centre with e4 and you've got a slight space advantage. If you're well prepared, though, I wouldn't imagine that that this would be so amazing for white. It's a slight advantage, but nothing huge. I imagine that Gukesh was extremely well prepared on here. But this was, I think it was, it was an email game, not very high-rated players. Went rook c1, f3, queen a5. Ended in a white win. f3 is Torch's idea. I mean, in principle, white's a little bit better. Pawn weak and bishop, you know, hemmed in by the pawns. But yeah, you know, black has to play just around the dark squares here, you know, and yeah, d4 also around e5, and it's very hard for white to really make something of it. But it's possible to play. So possibly, you know, that would have been a better idea for Hikaru. Against the Queen's Gambit accepted proper, then Torch either wanted to take on c5 to play this endgame, which I think in general is probably the best line, or also b3 as well, also a line I've played as white. I mean, really looking to play bishop b2, and then maybe later at some stage even transposing into the queenless position, or just as here, for example, in Torch's main line, just taking here and playing the symmetrical position, but with the bishops on lovely diagonals. It should be a little edge for white, but yeah, again, not very much. But Queen's Gambit accepted is just very, very solid for black at the moment. Amazed that I picked this opening in order to play for wins against you know, any sort of opponents, even, you know, much lower rated ones, and amazing that I managed. That was yeah, just shows when you believe in an opening, you can achieve amazing things somehow. So lots more on d4 in the PGN, but I'll just sort of leave it there a little bit. Can show you a couple more things. c4. Torch is just playing e5. That's like all the engines, and they're playing very similar lines. Always want to go c6, and then d5 in actual fact. And well, what Torch comes up with is quite interesting. I spent quite a lot of time analysing these lines when they were quite fresh and new. I think it was a book by Viktor Michalewski, quite a good book actually. I think also for Quality Chess, you know, about these lines really got me onto it. And d takes c6 actually is an interesting Torch novelty. Aronian Tesakayan in Isle of Man 2023 went knight c3 and then c5, bishop g2, f5, which ended in a fairly rapid draw. D takes c6, interestingly enough, is Torch's idea. Knight c3, knight f6, bishop g2. Yeah, you know, interesting. Just nothing huge, 0.14 for white according to Torch, but yeah, quite interesting. Maybe just round off with the move that everyone wants, b3. Here Torch goes for a pretty main line really. Bishop d6, just grab the centre. Yeah, the engines don't believe in f4. There's if you want to know a bit more about the f4 line, actually, just go to the TCC. There was a bonus event called Top of the Top, quite a long time ago actually, but in that tournament there was quite a bit of b3, and Stowflace in particular, you know, was doing some amazing stuff with piece sacrifices, and I've done some videos on it actually. So also a New in Chess article, funnily enough, but in the New in Chess yearbook. But yeah, I mean, take a look at that, because yeah, there's an enormous amount of stuff there on f4. Oh, good lord! All my Friday alarms going off. So knight f3 is what Torch thinks is best. Castles, a6, bishop e2, and what's white done? Well, white's aiming to play c4 basically, and you're claiming that you know, black's development has got a little bit unnatural. But knight e7, c4, c6, and yeah, it looks. There should be a name for this. You know, we've had the bathtub. You know, with knights on g6 and b6. We should really have something for this one as well. So it's like a smiley face, isn't it, really? Knight c3 is a Torch novelty instead of d4. Knight h6, a4, and just looking for the plan of bishop a3. Wow, all fine. b4. Quite interesting, though, that Torch is avoiding putting a pawn in the centre and just sort of, you know, sort of just, yeah, playing it like a real sort of English or a hyper-modern game. Quite interesting in actual fact as well, you know. So yeah, not bad at all. So there we are. That was my quick run through Torch's openings with 1d4 and other stuff. As I said, you know, do take a look at the associated PGN. There's masses of extra stuff in there that I haven't gone through. Yeah, I mean, very interesting. There's some stuff that's, you know, common and recognisable, but there's little twists in everything. So that's nice. You know, it's nice to see really that you know, you can have lots of strong engines: Dragon, Leela, Stockfish, Torch, and you know, the list goes on. Ethereal, Berserk, and all that, and they all have you know, similar feelings about what's the absolute best line. But you know, in other variations, they always have their own ideas as well. Just shows how, you know, how rich chess is, and yeah, just shows that all the engine developers, they're all doing something slightly different, even if, you know, ideas or concepts are often similar. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed that. If you liked the video, why not give a like, subscribe to the channel, take a look at my new books, Silicon Road to Chess Improvement and Reengineering the Chess Classics. And otherwise, yeah, you know, I'm going to do hopefully, you know, some more stuff on. I'm going to start looking in more detail at Torch's openings, and hopefully find a few little interesting things there, just like I was doing with Dragon before. And yeah, I'm going to be using Torch a lot in my engine games, so yeah, we're going to see a lot of that happening as well. But yeah, you know, finally, a final big thank you to chess.com and Andrew Grant. You know, for thinking of me to have access to Torch like that. Really, yeah, always love trying out new engines and new things like that. So really cool. But anyway, yeah, you know, thanks very much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos. Thanks for watching.